When the cameras shut down and the red carpets get rolled away, Hollywood does not turn quiet. It turns smaller. It becomes the kind of town where secrets do not stay buried. They just move from table to table, from driver to assistant, from one guarded smile to the next, inside places like the Polo Lounge or behind the tall gates of Brentwood, where the hedges are trimmed so perfectly you could mistake them for safety. And that is why what is happening with the Reiner family right now is not just another headline. It is not just another tragedy that people scroll past while eating dinner, because the story most people think they know is the simple version, the clean version, the version that fits neatly into a news alert and fades by the next morning. But the version being whispered, the version that people close to this world cannot stop talking about, is something else entirely. A Hollywood legend is gone. A home that looked untouchable became a crime scene. And the silence that followed has been so heavy it felt like the whole industry was holding its breath. Then the silence cracked. Not with a press conference, not with a polished statement from a publicist, but with Tracy Reiner. If that name does not ring instantly, her face probably does. She is Penny Marshall's daughter, adopted by Rob Reiner during their marriage. She grew up with one foot inside the dynasty and one foot slightly outside of it, close enough to see everything, distant enough to notice what others learn to ignore. And that position matters now, because what Tracy has reportedly shared, the details of a final conversation she had with Rob just days before everything collapsed, is the kind of revelation that changes the way people look at a legacy. Online accounts describe it as not a goodbye, they describe it as a confession. And before we go one step further, you need to understand the emotional trap this story sets. Rob Reiner was not just a director, he was a mood. He was the man behind films that taught generations to believe in the power of words, the kind of a storyteller who could make you laugh, then break your heart, then somehow give you hope again before the credits rolled. So when people heard what happened, the instinct was to reach for the easiest explanation. Something sudden, something shocking, something that feels like it came out of nowhere. But the whispers say it did not come out of nowhere. The whispers say it had been building inside that house for years. And Tracy, according to the narrative now spreading, is the key that unlocks that darker timeline. The story goes like this. The call came late on a Tuesday. Rob sounded different. Not the familiar voice people remember, not the energetic New York edge, not the confident mind that could direct a room full of stars and still make it feel like a conversation. He sounded hollow, like something had been scraped out of him. And here is the line that makes people stop breathing for a second, because it feels too poetic to be real, and yet too specific to be invented. According to what is being repeated online, Rob told Tracy something she cannot forget. He said he had spent his whole life writing happy endings for strangers, but he did not know how to write one for his own son. That single sentence is the center of this entire tragedy. Because if that is true, then this was never only about fame or money or even a crime. It was about a father realizing, too late, that unconditional love can become a weapon when the person you are trying to save learns how to use your heart against you. And this is where the story crosses from family heartbreak into a wider Hollywood reckoning, because another name has been pulled into the orbit of this nightmare: Tom Cruise. Yes, that Tom Cruise, Rob Reiner and Tom Cruise go back decades, linked forever by a few good men. A film built on discipline, intensity, control. And if there is one thing the world believes it knows about Tom Cruise, it is this. He does not tolerate chaos. He does not respect excuses. He respects boundaries. So when reports and rumors started circling that Tom had seen cracks in Rob's family life years ago and that he allegedly tried to intervene in his own intense private way, people leaned in because it felt like a collision between two philosophies. One man who believed love could fix anything, another man who believed love without limits can destroy everything. And now, with the public trying to understand what really happened, Tracy's voice is being treated like a match held over gasoline. Because if she truly heard fear in Rob's voice that night, if the home had shifted from worry into terror, then the story we are being told is not the beginning. It is the ending. And the part nobody is ready for is this. The accounts say Rob was not afraid of illness, he was afraid of what was happening under his own roof. So the question becomes unavoidable. What exactly did Tracy hear on that call? What was Rob trying to warn her about? And why would a man with everything, money, fame, power, still sound like someone trapped inside a burning house? That is where we go next. Rob did not call Tracy to talk about doctors or treatments or what the tabloids would say if his health took a turn. According to the story being repeated, he called because he was afraid of the atmosphere in his own home. Not a vague fear either. Not the kind of fear that comes from worrying about the future. It was the kind of fear that comes from living next to volatility so long that you start to measure your days by tone of voice, by footsteps in the hallway, by whether a door closes softly or slams like a warning. Tracy described him as hollowed out, like the energy that defined him had finally been burned away by something he could not fix. And here is the most brutal detail. He was not afraid of dying. He was afraid of what might happen before he ever got the chance. Because when a parent is trapped in that cycle, you do something that looks heroic from the outside but feels like a slow suffocation on the inside. You start trying to manage the unmanageable. You start negotiating with the storms. You start believing that if you are patient enough, kind enough, quiet enough, the next explosion will not come. But it always comes. And this is where the narrative drags Tom Cruise fully into frame. Rob Reiner and Tom Cruise are connected forever through A Few Good Men, a film about discipline, truth, pressure, and the kind of confrontation that leaves no room to hide. And the public image of Tom Cruise has always been the same: control, precision, and obsession with a structure. So the story now circulating is that Tom was one of the few people in Rob's circle who did not romanticize what was happening. He did not call it a rough patch. He did not call it a family issue. Sources claim that privately, Tom looked at the situation as a dangerous pattern of enabling, the kind that can turn a household into a pressure cooker. And it gets even more intense. The transcript describes a recent dinner with industry heavyweights, the kind of room where everyone speaks in careful sentences, where people wrap criticism in compliments, where nobody says the sharp thing out loud. But allegedly, Tom dropped the diplomatic facade. No PR language, no gentle wording, just a direct condemnation of what he saw as the enabling culture around celebrity families. The idea that when a famous family starts unraveling, people look away because the name is too powerful. The narrative claims Tom believed that the fame did not just make the situation more visible, it made it easier to ignore, because money can silence a lot of alarms, and influence can make a lot of people pretend they did not hear the screaming. Rob, on the other hand, did what he always did. He tried to turn pain into art. He tried to take the chaos and shape it into something meaningful, something cathartic, something that could make sense on paper, even if it could not be controlled in real life. But the story says Tom's response was cold. In a way, only truth can be cold. That Rob was too soft, that he was trying to guide his son the way he would guide an actor on a set, thinking he could direct him out of trouble. And the harsh line that lands like a punch is this: you cannot direct chaos. You cannot rewrite a person's choices just because you love them hard enough. And that's exactly why the phone call with Tracy matters so much, because it suggests Rob finally knew he was losing control of the narrative inside his own house. And when Tracy spoke about that call, the transcript paints it as something deeper than sadness. It was dread. Rob was not describing inconvenience, he was describing fear. He reportedly told her he did not recognize his own son anymore. Not as an insult, not as anger, as grief. Like he was watching a person fade away and something else move into their place. And then comes the part that makes this story so painful, because it is not just what Rob said, it is what he asked. The transcript says it is unfair to ask Tracy why she did not do more, because Rob explicitly told her not to. He made her promise to keep it private. He was still protecting Nick even in that moment, still shielding him from consequences, still hoping the storm would pass if they could just hold on a little longer. That is the cruelty of parental love when it becomes survival. You start treating the truth like a grenade. You hold it carefully. You hide it. You convince yourself you are protecting everyone by keeping it buried. And Tracy, according to this narrative, has been living with the weight of that promise because she honored her father's wish for privacy. And now that privacy looks like a silence that helped nothing. The transcript then shifts into details that are almost unbearable because they sound like a family slowly learning to lie to itself just to keep the walls standing. Tracy reportedly revealed that in the last months, Rob began noticing items going missing. Jewelry, watches, pieces of memorabilia, little things that carry memory, that carry history, that carry identity. But instead of facing it directly, the story says Rob pretended he had simply misplaced them, as if he was gaslighting himself, rewriting reality in real time, because acknowledging the truth would mean admitting the family was breaking apart. And that is why this does not feel like a sudden tragedy in this narrative. It feels like an ultimate act of self-sacrifice that turned into an ultimate tragedy. Because Rob did not see a monster. He saw a wounded child, a child he believed he could still reach. And then the transcript widens the lens again, back to the industry itself. It claims Tom has allegedly said Hollywood helped destroy that family, not with one single event, but with 1,000 small acts of looking away. Security guards looking away, assistants looking away, and even doctors in the whispers of this story looking away, while prescriptions kept cycling through the house like bandages slapped on an open wound. Then, the final detail in this section hits like a slow collapse. Rob reportedly told Tracy that Michelle was exhausted, that she was fading, that he could see the light going out in his wife, not because she stopped loving, But because loving had become a battle, she fought every day just to survive the next morning. And if that is true, then this phone call was not just a confession. It was a father reaching out from inside a collapsing world, trying to put one piece of truth into the hands of someone he trusted because he knew what was coming. And he still could not stop protecting the person at the center of it. Now the question gets even darker. If Rob knew the volatility was escalating, if things were disappearing, if Michelle was fading, then what was happening behind closed doors in those final weeks? And what else did Rob leave behind trying to prove that he did not just watch this happen, that he tried? And this is where the story stops feeling like a single horrific night and starts feeling like a slow collapse that lasted years. Because according to Tracy, the house wasn't living in peace and then suddenly struck by lightning. It was living inside a storm with patterns, the kind of patterns families learn to normalize because admitting the truth is too terrifying. Tracy described it like this. There would be explosions, then there would be silence, then there would be the apologies. Not the kind of apology that changes anything, the kind of apology that buys time, the kind of apology that sounds convincing enough to make you believe for one more night that tomorrow could be different. And then, like a cruel joke, the morning would come. Breakfast would happen. Life would pretend it was normal, and the cycle would start again. That detail matters because it explains something people outside that house could never understand. Why didn't they just fix it? Why didn't they just leave? Why didn't they just call someone? Because when you live inside a cycle like that, you stop thinking in solutions. You start thinking in survival. You start measuring progress in hours, not years. If tonight is quiet, you tell yourself you've won. If tomorrow looks calm, you tell yourself the worst is over. And in that kind of emotional hostage situation, even love becomes a trap. Because Rob, by all accounts, didn't just love his son. He tried to rescue him with love. And Tracy's point, the one that feels almost unbearable, is that love did not save this family. Love kept them inside the fire long enough to burn. Now here's what makes this story even harder to digest. Rob Reiner built his career on dialogue. He built his life on the belief that words can change people, that a speech can turn the tide, that if you just say the right thing in the right moment, the human heart will wake up and choose a better path. He gave the world films that taught us to believe in connection, in redemption, in the power of a single conversation. But inside his own home, Tracy says, dialogue failed. Those brilliant Sorkin-style speeches that feel unstoppable on screen, they do not work on addiction. They do not work on collapse. They do not work on a person who has stopped listening to reality. Logic doesn't win. Reason doesn't win. And the most devastating part is that Rob, the man who made a living writing truth, had to learn that truth the hardest way possible. He could not talk his way out of this. He could not love his way out of this. And that's why what Tracy shared next hit people like a punch. Because it wasn't just emotion, it was evidence. Tracy revealed something that hadn't been widely talked about at the time. She said Rob had started writing a journal, not a memoir meant for fans, not a glamorous Hollywood reflection on his greatest hits. A journal, a private record, something that reads, in this narrative, like a man leaving breadcrumbs behind, because he knew the world might one day demand an explanation, and he wanted it on the record that he tried, that he fought, that he didn't just sit back and watch the unthinkable happen. Tracy believes those journals are now part of evidence, and if they ever see the light of day, they will not just change how people view this case, they could destroy the illusion that celebrity families are protected by fame, because the journals suggest something simple and terrifying. Rob knew the truth. He saw what was happening. He documented it. And still, it got worse. Tracy said she saw some of that documentation months earlier during a brief encounter, just enough to realize this wasn't casual journaling. It was a man building a file, a man quietly preparing for consequences he didn't want, but could no longer deny were coming. And then there's Tom, not as a headline gimmick, not as a celebrity cameo, but as a symbol in the story Tracy is telling. Tom reportedly urged Rob to use that evidence to get legal help, to stop handling it privately, to stop protecting the image, to stop believing he could manage a crisis that had already outgrown the walls of that house. Because in this narrative, the real villain isn't only the person who spiraled, it's the environment that allowed the spiral to keep going without intervention. The bubble, the silence, the way fame can create a world where consequences don't land the way they do for ordinary people, where people hesitate to call the police, where staff are afraid to speak, where friends don't want to betray you, so they quietly watch you drown. And Tracy's message, underneath all the grief, is that this case is going to expose something rotten at the center of celebrity parenting. The belief that love alone is enough. The belief that money can cushion disaster. The belief that protecting your child from consequences is the same thing as protecting your child. Because if Rob's journals really exist the way Tracy suggests, then the record will show something heartbreaking. A father trying to do the right thing. A father trying to save his child. A father still choosing love, even when love was the most dangerous option on the table. And now, with the world watching, with the headlines screaming, with people arguing online like this is entertainment, Tracy is insisting we see what it really is. A warning, a mirror, a tragedy that didn't start when this story hit the news. It started the first time the family convinced itself that silence was safer than truth. And if you're asking yourself what could possibly come next, it's this. If those journals ever surface, what else is inside them? What names are written there? What moments were recorded? What was happening behind closed doors that never made it into any official timeline? Because Tracy is still sifting, and she believes there are more calls, more evidence, more pieces of this story that the public hasn't seen yet. And when those pieces come out, the legacy won't just be rewritten, it will be cracked open. And this is where Tracy's story stops being about rumors and phone calls and court headlines and becomes something much more uncomfortable. Because according to Tracy, this isn't about curiosity. It isn't about turning tragedy into content. And it definitely isn't about chasing attention. She's had proximity to fame her entire life. If she wanted the spotlight, she wouldn't need a tragedy to get it. She's doing this, in her words, because she refuses to let the official narrative become the only story people remember. Because official narratives are clean, they are polite, they protect legacies, they package a family's collapse into neat sentences that don't make anyone feel responsible. And Tracy is essentially saying, no, no more, not this time. She says, Rob didn't die because he was weak. He died because he kept choosing love, even when love was the most dangerous option on the table. That single idea changes everything. It reframes the story from what happened that night to what happened for years. It forces you to imagine the kind of exhaustion that doesn't show up in paparazzi photos. Because Tracy points out something that feels almost cruel now that people look back. You can see it in old interviews, the tired eyes, the slower smile, the way he looked like a man carrying something heavier than age. And for years, people explained it away the easiest way. Oh, he's just getting older. Oh, that's life. But Tracy says it wasn't just aging. It was a stress. It was fear. It was the constant pressure of living inside a household where one wrong moment could turn into a crisis. And then she goes further into territory that makes the industry uncomfortable. She suggests that Hollywood itself contributed to the pressure cooker because celebrity families don't fall apart in the open like ordinary families do. They fall apart behind walls, behind NDAs, behind assistants who are trained to smooth things over, behind friends who don't want to be the one to betray you by telling the truth. And when that's your world, the spiral doesn't get interrupted. It gets managed, it gets hidden, it gets postponed until it can't be postponed anymore. And this is where Tom Cruise becomes something more than a name dropped for drama. In Tracy's narrative, he's not the hero. He's not the villain. He's a symbol of the harder approach, the approach Rob could never fully take. Tom represents boundaries, consequences, cold clarity, the kind of thinking that says love without limits isn't love, it's permission. And Tracy's entire point is that Rob couldn't live that way. Rob was built differently. He was a father first. He was a storyteller, a man who believed that if you stay close enough, if you keep reaching, if you keep forgiving, eventually the person you love will come back. But that belief has a dark side, because what if they don't come back? What if they learn that your forgiveness is predictable? What if they learn that your mercy has no end? Then love stops being a lifeline. It becomes the floor they never hit. And Tracy delivers the most brutal truth of all. You don't stop loving your child just because they scare you. That sentence feels like it should be comforting. But inside this story, it's terrifying because it explains how this could happen. Not because Rob didn't care, not because he didn't try, but because he cared so much that he couldn't bring himself to do the thing that might have saved everyone, to treat the situation as dangerous, not just heartbreaking. And Tracy keeps dragging the audience back from the sensational details back to the human reality, not the headlines, not the arguments online, not the fantasy version where everything is simple and people always make the right choice, the real reality. A man who built American culture for decades, sitting inside his own home, realizing there was a problem Hollywood magic couldn't fix. Not with charm, not with money, not with connections, not with one more talk. And that's why Tracy's story lands like a warning, not a gossip bomb. Because she isn't just talking about Rob, she's holding up a mirror to every family that thinks they can contain a spiral by being polite, by being private, by waiting, by hoping. Because hope can be beautiful, but hope can also be deadly when it replaces action. And this is where the story turns into a message that feels like it was written in fire. If you see that spiral, don't wait. Don't worry about how it looks. Don't worry about neighbors. Don't worry about press. Don't worry about protecting the family name. Scream for help. Because silence is not loyalty. Silence is just a pause before the worst moment arrives. And the deeper Tracy goes, the more it feels like she's building towards something she hasn't fully said out loud yet, because she keeps returning to the same haunting idea. There is more calls, more evidence, more pieces she's still sifting through. And that means the version we think we know right now may still be incomplete. And that is the part Tracy keeps returning to, because it is the part nobody wants to hear until it is too late. If you see that spiral, don't wait. Don't be polite. Don't smooth it over. Don't whisper about it in the kitchen and then pretend everything is fine when the person walks into the room. Don't worry about what the neighbors will think. Don't worry about the headlines. Don't worry about how it looks to the outside world. Scream for help, because silence can feel like loyalty, but in a situation like this, silence is just a pause before the worst moment arrives. And Tracy's point is painfully simple. A family can survive embarrassment. A family can survive people talking. A family can survive a bad headline. But a family cannot survive the kind of unchecked collapse that happens when everyone agrees silently to pretend the crisis isn't real. That's why she says this story shouldn't be consumed like entertainment. Because the names are famous, yes, but the pattern isn't. The pattern exists in ordinary homes too, where there are no gates, no assistants, no lawyers, no security guards to buffer the chaos. And what happens is always the same. People wait, people hope, people tell themselves it'll get better after the holidays, or it'll get better once he calms down, or it'll get better when we finally have that talk. But time doesn't heal what keeps getting fed. Time just gives the spiral more room to grow. Then Tracy does something that hits harder than any allegation ever could. She asks you to remember Rob Reiner the way the world learned to love him. Not the tragedy, not the crime scene, not the final headlines. She asks you to remember the man who gave people comfort, the man who gave people laughter, the man who gave people that feeling that a good story can make your life feel less lonely. When you think of The Princess Bride, when you think of A Spinal Tap, when you think of the work that made Rob feel like part of America's emotional furniture for decades, she wants you to remember there was another side of the coin, a private side, a side where the same man who could shape a perfect scene could not shape a perfect outcome for his own child. And then she brings you right back to the details that won't let the mind rest. Remember the phone call to Tracy. Remember the fear in his voice, the way he didn't sound like a director or a celebrity or a man protected by wealth. He sounded like a father cornered by something he couldn't control. Remember the locked atmosphere of that house, the feeling that something had been building behind closed doors for years, because as Tracy frames it, this was not a story Hollywood magic could fix. No amount of charm fixes addiction. No amount of money fixes emotional collapse. No amount of legacy fixes a cycle that keeps repeating. And that's the moment this stops being news and becomes something else. A warning, a mirror held up to every family that thinks love means never drawing a line. A mirror held up to every friend who notices the signs and decides it's not their place. A mirror held up to every community that keeps choosing comfort over confrontation. Tracy also makes it clear she's not finished. She keeps hinting that there may be more calls, more messages, more evidence, more pieces. She is still slowly sifting through, almost like she's afraid of what she'll find, but even more afraid of what it would mean to stay silent again. And that leaves the audience sitting in an uneasy space Because if there is more, then the public timeline is still incomplete. If there is more, then this story people are arguing about online is only the surface. And if those journals exist the way she suggests, then there may be pages the world isn't ready to read. But for now, Tracy says the message is already clear. The Rob Reiner we loved didn't go out in some glamorous Hollywood scandal. He didn't go out in a spotlight. In this narrative, he went out the way so many parents do when they're trapped in a crisis they refuse to stop loving. He went out trying to be a father. And yes, the world is right to be heartbroken. Yes, the world is right to be shocked. But Tracy adds something that stings because it forces honesty. Let's not pretend we didn't see the signs. They were there, not for days, for a very long time. The tired eyes, the heaviness, the subtle ways the joy faded, the way the public could feel something was off, and yet everyone kept moving, because that is what people do when the story is too uncomfortable. And now at the end of this chapter, you're left with the questions that don't have clean answers. What else is in those journals? What other names are written there? What other moments were recorded that never made it into any official narrative? And if all of this has been building for years, then the final act is not just tragic, it's almost Shakespearean. A man known for stories about truth and love, trapped in a real-life story where truth arrived too late and love couldn't stop the blade from falling, and the streets of Los Angeles, the same city that sells fantasy for a living, are now the backdrop for a tragedy that feels too cruel to be real. And yet, here it is. And this is the part Tracy can barely say out loud because it is the part that makes everything feel irreversible. When people first heard what happened, they wanted a single explanation. One moment, one trigger, one clean reason they could point to, so their minds could file it away and move on. But Tracy's story refuses to be filed away because she keeps circling the same haunting truth. This didn't begin with a death. It began with denial. It began with the quiet choices families make when they are scared. The choice to handle it privately, the choice to protect the name, the choice to believe that love means absorbing the damage again and again until the person you're trying to save finally changes. And in the version she's sharing, Rob Reiner didn't lose because he didn't care. He lost because he cared too much to do the one thing that might have stopped the spiral, to treat the situation like an emergency, not a phase, to stop negotiating with the storm, to stop thinking he could outlove the darkness. Tracy says she's carried guilt like a stone in her chest because she listened when Rob asked her to keep things private. She didn't go to the press. She didn't run to friends. She didn't blow the family open. She honored him, but now she can't stop thinking about the cruel irony. Privacy didn't protect them. Privacy only protected the collapse. And if her voice sounds sharp now, it's because she's not speaking to the internet. She's speaking to every person who has ever stood outside a locked door, hearing a situation getting worse, telling themselves it's not their place. She's speaking to every friend who noticed the signs and decided not to meddle. She's speaking to every family that confuses silence for loyalty. Because what happened to the Reiners in this narrative is the nightmare ending of a story that can start in any home. It starts with excuses. It starts with hope. It starts with, we can handle it. And then it ends with a tragedy nobody can rewrite. And this is where Tom Cruise, in the way the story has been framed, becomes the contrast that hurts the most. Rob believed in redemption through patience. Tom represents redemption through boundaries. Rob believed that the heart could soften anyone. Tom represents the belief that consequences are sometimes the only language chaos understands. And Tracy is not saying one man is better than the other. She's saying the collision of those two philosophies reveals something terrifying. Sometimes love is not enough. Sometimes love needs backup. Sometimes love has to be paired with hard action, not because you want to punish someone, but because you want to save what's left. Because Tracy's final message isn't a twist. It's a warning. If you're living through something that feels like it's escalating, stop waiting for the right time to act. There is no right time. There's only before and after, and she says she wishes she could go back to that phone call, back to that hollow voice, back to that moment where a father was trying to keep his family together with nothing but the last thread of his own strength. She wishes she could rewrite it, but she can't. No one can. So all she can do now is tell the story the way she believes it really felt. Not glamorous, not cinematic, not clean. A slow suffocation behind beautiful gates. A father who spent a lifetime giving strangers happy endings, finally realizing he couldn't write one for his own son. And if that sentence is true, if that was really his final emotional confession, then it becomes a painful kind of legacy. Not the films, not the awards, not the applause, but the reminder that even the most talented storyteller in Hollywood could not out-script real life, and that is why people can't stop talking about this. Because it's not just shocking, it's human. It's the terrifying thought that love can become the thing that keeps you trapped. That the instinct to protect can become the instinct that delays rescue. That a family can be famous, powerful, and still fall apart in the most ordinary, heartbreaking way possible. So if you're watching this and you feel that knot in your stomach, that quiet dread, that feeling that something in your own life has been escalating while everyone pretends it's fine, please hear Tracy's message through the noise. Don't wait. Don't hide it. Don't protect the image. Protect the people. Because silence doesn't keep you safe. Silence only keeps the spiral alive. And now I want to ask you something. Do you think Rob was protecting his son? Or was he protecting the hope of who his son used to be? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more deep, emotional Hollywood stories told with the details nobody dares to say out loud, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications.